Story 1. When my dad first showed me the old Victorian house he bought for cheap, I didn't think much of it. Just another creaky, dusty relic from the late 1800s. But I soon learned its crumbling walls held many dark secrets. It started on our first night there. I awoke to the sound of a woman singing faintly downstairs. In my sleepy state, I assumed it was my mom and drifted back to sleep. In the morning, I asked her about it. She gave me a puzzled look and said she hadn't been singing. I brushed it off as a dream. Over the next few weeks, strange things kept happening. I'd hear footsteps pacing the halls late at night, when everyone was asleep. Doors would suddenly slam shut throughout the house. One time, I even saw a shadowy figure dart across the foyer and vanish through a wall when I called out to it. An unsettled feeling permeated the house. I started digging into the history, searching newspaper archives at the local library. I discovered that in the 1930s, the house had belonged to a wealthy family called the Bartons. The night before their daughter Abigail's wedding, she was found dead at the bottom of the stairs, an apparent suicide. After Abigail's death, the Bartons abandoned the house, unable to bear living there without her. Since then, tenants never stayed long, complaining it was haunted. It had remained vacant for over a decade when my dad bought it. One night, I awoke to faint weeping coming from inside the walls. It sounded like Abigail crying. I grabbed a hammer, broke through the crumbling plaster, and found a small journal hidden in the cavity. It was Abigail's diary from the 1930s. She wrote about being sad and lonely as her controlling parents planned her wedding to a man she did not love. The final entry was from the night she died. It said, "Forgive me, for I cannot bear the life laid out before me. I know Mother and Father will never allow me to leave. So tonight I take my fate into my own hands. May God have mercy on my soul." Reading her tragic story, I felt immense sadness for her. That night, I slept with the diary under my pillow and had a vivid dream of dancing with Abigail at the wedding she never had. When I awoke, the diary was gone. Over the next few weeks, Abigail's ghostly presence only grew stronger. At night, I'd hear her singing old 1930s ballads. The scent of her floral perfume would waft through the halls. I'd even catch glimpses of her ghostly figure dressed in a flowing white gown, usually heading for the attic where she must have hid from her parents as a girl. One evening at dusk, I followed her up to the attic and found an old trunk etched with her initials. Inside were her personal effects, books, journals, and childhood toys long forgotten. I spent hours up there reading her diaries, getting to know this sad, lonely girl who never got to live the life she wanted. I became obsessed with helping set her free. Late one night, I was awoken by Abigail's ghost standing over my bed, more lifelike than ever before. She gestured for me to follow her to the attic. She led me to an old dollhouse, beautifully crafted but covered in layers of dust. Kneeling down, she pointed at a hidden compartment. I opened it to find a key with a tag reading, "For the truth." Abigail's ghost looked at me pleadingly before vanishing. Gripping the key tightly, I crept downstairs to my dad's office. The key fit perfectly into a locked file cabinet that had always been off limits to me. Inside, I found documents revealing that my dad had known the house's history when he bought it. All the paranormal activity was listed in the disclosures, but he had purchased it against the agent's advice. I finally understood. Abigail wanted me to learn the truth about how my dad knowingly trapped us in the haunted house. I confronted him the next morning. When I showed him the documents and key, all color drained from his face. He broke down crying, confessing he was in debt and the house was our only option. He never intended to put us at risk. I told him we had to move out immediately. Abigail had made her presence known. This was her house, and she wanted us gone. As we packed, Abigail made sure we wouldn't change our minds. Windows shattered, doors flew open, objects crashed off shelves. The house seemed to shake with rage. But finally we drove away, leaving Abigail to her tragic peace. Later, I returned to bury her diaries and treasured possessions, so she could finally rest. My dad donated the house to the Historical Society, on the condition that Abigail's story be remembered and retold. After learning the truth about the sad, lonely girl who still wandered its halls, no one ever moved into the old Victorian again, and Abigail's presence remains undisturbed to this day. Story 2. When my mom told me we were moving into a new house, I was thrilled. As an imaginative 12-year-old, I loved exploring and saw it as an adventure. That feeling didn't last long. Right from the start, the old Victorian house gave me an uneasy vibe. It was run down with peeling paint, creaky floors, and drafty rooms. My mom said it just had character and assured me I'd get used to it. On our first night there, I woke suddenly to the sound of footsteps creaking down the hallway. I assumed my mom was up using the bathroom. The next morning, she said it wasn't her. Over breakfast, I asked the previous owner if he had heard strange noises at night. He avoided eye contact and changed the subject. I knew then that something wasn't right. The first incident happened about a week after moving in. I was alone watching TV in the den when the door slowly creaked open. I called out thinking it was my mom, but no one was there. I searched the whole house to make sure all the doors and windows were locked. When I told my mom what happened, she dismissed it as just the wind. But there was no wind that night. Not long after, I started hearing voices murmuring and whispering throughout the house late at night when I was in bed. The voices were too indistinct to make out words, but sounded like a group of people chatting. Sometimes it sounded like arguing. When I strained to listen closer, the voices would go silent. But they always returned as soon as I was drifting off. One weekend when my mom was away on a trip, the voices kept me up all night long. At dawn, exhausted, I decided to try to record them on my phone. As soon as I hit record, the voices stopped completely. For hours I sat waiting, but heard nothing. It was only later, when I played back the recording, that I made out the faint sound of whispering voices. I became convinced the house was haunted. When I told my friends, they dared me to set up cameras to try and capture evidence. The next Friday night, I left video cameras running in the den and upstairs hallway while I stayed over at a friend's house. But when I reviewed the footage the next day, nothing unusual turned up. Then things got scary. I started hearing heavy footsteps stomping up and down the stairs at night. They were loud enough to shake my bedroom. I'd leap out of bed to try and catch a glimpse, but never saw anything. Doors would slam shut violently on their own throughout the house. Some nights I'd hear angry yelling or sinister laughter echoing through the halls. The activity always peaked between 2-4 a.m. My cat refused to stay in my room at night and would claw at my door to get out. I'd find her in the morning, cowering under the couch. My mom still refused to believe the house was haunted, even after I played her the recordings of the voices. She blamed the sounds on faulty plumbing. But I knew this was an ordinary creaky old house. Terrified of being alone there at night, I started begging my mom to let me stay at friends' houses. Sensing my genuine fear, she finally hired a medium to do a seance to put my mind at ease. The medium arrived on a stormy Saturday night. As soon as she stepped foot in the house, she turned pale. "There's something very dark here," she said. We gathered in the living room, lit some candles, and joined hands. As the medium slipped into a trance, the candle flames suddenly blew out, leaving us in total darkness. Thunder crashed outside as she began speaking in a strange voice. "Get out," it growled. "You are not welcome. This is my home." The medium's body started convulsing violently as she screamed for us to leave immediately. My mom had to half carrying her shaking body out the front door. We stayed in a hotel that night. The next day, I came back with my mom to pack up our things. Whatever was in the house did not want us there. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I felt an unseen force shove me from behind. I tumbled down the stairs, badly bruising my ribs. While grabbing clothes from my closet, the closet door slammed violently on its own, narrowly missing my face. While packing boxes in the kitchen, the faucets suddenly turned on full blast, spraying water everywhere. Cupboards flew open, drawers rattled, and lights flickered. The scariest moment was when I thought I saw a dark, faceless figure dart across the hallway into the den. We left most of our things behind and never returned. That house remains the source of my worst nightmares. I'll never forget the angry, hateful energy that inhabited its walls. My mom says she regrets not believing me sooner. We moved into a modern apartment where I finally felt at peace again. But I worry for whoever moves into that house next. Some doors should stay closed and some places should stay empty. Story 3. It was a chilly October evening when I arrived in the small town of Willow Creek. I had just started a new job as a nurse at the local hospital and was moving into my new apartment. The building was old but well maintained, with ornate moldings and hardwood floors that creaked with every step. After the long drive, I was exhausted and collapsed onto my bare mattress, falling into a deep sleep. I woke suddenly in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Still groggy, I assumed it was just another tenant heading to bed, but the footsteps continued, pacing up and down the hall at odd intervals throughout the night. This repeated every night that week, incessant pacing of footsteps in the hallway well into the early morning. After a week of sleepless nights, I decided to ask the landlord about it. He told me the building had been there since the 1930s and had a bit of a sordid history. But not to worry about ghosts or anything silly like that. Unconvinced, I started asking around town about the history of the building. An elderly shopkeeper told me that it used to be a tuberculosis sanatorium. In 1943, a patient had wandered from his room in a feverish delirium and fallen down the stairwell to his death. Since then, tenants had complained about hearing footsteps pacing the halls at night. A few nights later, I awoke to the now familiar sound of footsteps outside my door. I peered through the peephole, but saw only the empty hallway, dimly lit by the EXIT sign over the stairs. As I watched, the footsteps slowly passed by my door, the sound of creaking floorboards audible, but no figure in sight. I followed slowly behind, tracing the steps to the stairwell where they stopped abruptly. Then silence. Terrified, I backed quickly into my apartment and locked the door. I didn't hear the footsteps again that night, but slept restlessly. The next evening after work, I stopped into the local historical society to dig deeper. An old newspaper article corroborated the story of the TB patient's death in '43. The sanatorium closed shortly after due to ongoing supernatural disturbances. When I arrived home, the front door of my building was ajar. Strange, since it was always kept locked. Cautiously, I walked upstairs to my apartment. Everything seemed normal until I entered my bedroom and found the closet door wide open. I knew I had shut it that morning. Clothes were strewn about the room as if someone had rifled through them. But I was certain I was the only one with the key. For several days, apart from the footsteps, I had no other incidents. Then I began to notice objects that I knew I had not left out. Kitchen drawers standing open. Lights on that I thought I had turned off, doors unlatched. It was as if someone was moving things just enough to make their presence known. One night, the activity escalated. I was drifting off to sleep when I felt the mattress depressed next to me, as if someone was sitting on the edge of the bed. I lay frozen in fear until I felt the distinct pressure move across the bed and the blanket lift as if someone were climbing in beside me. There were no footsteps, no apparition, only the palpable sense that something was very wrong. I leaped from the bed screaming and ran from the apartment. I knew then I had to move out. The final straw came a few nights later. I awoke to see a tall silhouette with elongated limbs standing over me, looming menacingly in the darkness. I fumbled frantically for the light switch, flicking it on to reveal nothing there. But when I turned the light back off, the shadow figure was once again visible, hovering silently by the bed. In near hysterics, I called the landlord the next day to tell him I was breaking the lease. He seemed eerily unsurprised by my story. No one's been able to stay long in 4A. The footsteps drive them off eventually, he said matter-of-factly. It was small comfort. I never spent another night in the gloomy old sanatorium-turned-apartment building. Whatever sinister presence inhabited its walls was not going to relent until it had driven me away too. To this day, I wonder about the sad, lonely spirit pacing the halls endlessly, looking for someone to share in its suffering. I feel pity for the poor soul, but I'll never again make the mistake of moving into a haunted home. Some doors are better left unopened.